Longest incarcerated crime bosses. The Italian-American Mafia consists of 5 families. They are the Banano family, the Colombo family, the Gambino family, the Genovese family, and the Lucchese family, with several other families being incorporated along the way. Becoming one of the longest reigning criminal bosses is no easy feat. They're constantly under threat of being kidnapped, murdered, or imprisoned. We've compiled a list of criminal bosses who've spent a large part of their lives in prison, some of whom are still incarcerated. Salvatore Lo Piccolo, 14 years. Salvatore might never live to be a free man ever again, but he's all right with that. After all, the Baron has been successfully operating from behind bars for close to 20 years at this point. Lo Piccolo is probably one of the more underrated criminal bosses in the mafioso's history, probably because he was never acknowledged as a crime boss at all. Bernardo Provenzano was the boss of the Corleonesi syndicate in the Italian mob. At the time of his arrest, Provenzano had named Lo Piccolo as his successor, but owing to the mafioso war that had been going on long before Provenzano's own arrest, Lo Piccolo was never necessarily recognized as a crime boss. Nevertheless, the man was ruthless. He had survived the first and second mafioso wars while being wanted for murder by the Italian government. Lo Piccolo had been on the run since 1983 and was a man of interest in several criminal proceedings, and de facto charged in a few others. Police tried to locate him and his son Sandro, but they were unable for over 20 years, partly because they didn't have a picture of Lo Piccolo and were relying on CGI. Interestingly enough, when he was apprehended, it was because the police had a more recent image of his son. Lo Piccolo, at the time of his arrest, looked nothing like the computer-generated image in his profile. Vittorio Amuso, 31 years. At 87 years old, Vittorio "Little Vic" Amuso is the longest-serving crime boss of New York's 5 families. However, much of his delegations are from behind bars. Little Vic is currently serving a life sentence at the Federal Correctional Institute in Cumberland, Maryland. He's down 32 years and has a lifetime to go. Amuso had originally been an enforcer for the Colombo family and was widely regarded as Joseph "Crazy Joe" Gallo's prodigy. However, after Joey Gallo was shot on his 43rd birthday in Little Italy, many members of the Colombo family defected to the 4 other crime families. Amuso became an associate of the Lucchese family. Amuso's reign between the 1980s and the 1990s is widely regarded as the bloodiest time in the American mafia scene. In fact, Little Vic was referred to as the Deadly Don by Charles Rose, Assistant United States Attorney. The mafia boss was wanted for a total of 17 murders and racketeering charges at the time of his arrest in 1987. However, some reports suggest that Amuso had actually either committed or ordered well over dozens of murders. Amuso had been indicted on several occasions, but he became one of the FBI's most wanted criminals in 1986 after he ordered the murder of John Gotti. Gotti was a Gambino family crime boss who had ordered the murder of another boss without authorization by the commission. Amuso ordered a hit on Gotti and had one of his men plant a bomb underneath his car in April of 1986. However, the bomb went off before Gotti got into the vehicle, instead killing his underboss, Frank DeCiso. Interestingly enough, Amuso's right-hand man and underboss, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, was the one who turned him in. Casso became an informant for the FBI and entered witness protection in exchange for damning evidence against Amuso and the Lucchese crime family. Amuso was arrested in 1991 for murder charges. He was indicted on those charges in 1992 and has been in prison ever since, serving a life sentence. 31 down and a lifetime to go. Carmine Persico, 32 years. Carmine Persico had earned the nickname Immortal owing to the fact that he'd been the Colombo family's boss since 1973. Many people believe they'd never live to see the day Persico stepped down from being one of the most notorious crime bosses in history, but Persico eventually passed away in 2019 after serving 32 years out of a life sentence. The future boss of the Colombo family was introduced to the family by Frank Abatamarco at the age of 16. Persico had originally been introduced to the Profazzi family, which eventually served as a forerunner for the Colombo family. At the young age of 16, Persico had built quite a reputation for himself as the leader of the criminal gang, the Garfield Boys. The group of teens was responsible for petty theft, carjacking, and extortion. But Persico was known for his violent temperament. At the age of 15, he fatally assaulted a rival street gang member in Brooklyn. Persico served no time in prison for the crime. The Profazzi family was destined for failure after their boss, Joe Profazzi, was outed for being an autocrat. He demanded huge sums from his people as pledge money. The family was thereafter divided, and given Persico's bloodthirsty nature, both sides wanted him. Persico acted as a double agent of sorts, and betrayed the resistance team after having initially collaborated with them. For this he earned the name The Snake. After Joe Profazzi's passing, the family was known as the Colombo family, but even then there were several internal conflicts going on. After the events of the Second Colombo War, Persico was named the family's boss. Ironically, the criminal boss was arrested and sentenced to life in prison less than a decade after he received the title. For the next 30 years of his life, Persico orchestrated murders, kidnappings, and extortion from his prison cell. His son was serving a life sentence of his own, and the only person the Colombo family trusted was Persico himself. In 2019, the crime boss died at the age of 89 after serving 32 years behind bars. Rafael Coutolo, 58 years. The Gospel, the Prince, the Professor, and the Monk. Rafael Coutolo was an Italian crime boss and the leader of the NCO, the Nuova Camorra Organizzata. Born in 1941, Coutolo was imprisoned at the age of 21 in 1963 after committing his first homicide. The future crime boss had allegedly slapped his victim's girlfriend and then shot him in the fight that ensued. What was unusual about Coutolo and the NCO was that it was an organized crime unit that had been born in and run through the Italian prison system. Since Coutolo had been indicted for murder, he had good standing in the prison system. Murderers were typically considered tough guys, and no one dared intercept their authority. Coutolo recognized this and decided to make good use of his newfound authority. The young man began by sheltering other men in prison who would otherwise have been abused by the guards or their fellow inmates. His modus operandi was a favor for a favor. For example, the crime boss would send money to the families of some prisoners and pay for some of the poorer prison's food and essentials from the prison commissary. It didn't take long for Coutolo to form a dedicated following of his own while in prison. His influence eventually rose in ranks from his fellow prisoners to guards and eventually to the commissioner. At the height of his notoriety, Coutolo would make phone calls to the commissioner and have him shuffle prisoners around to benefit the NCO. Most of Coutolo's criminal activities, save for the murder he was serving a life sentence for and a few crimes for when he was a young boy, was committed from prison. This included multiple murders, racketeerings, and kidnappings. The leader of the NCO was behind the close-range assassination attempt on Antonio Spavone, the former Camorra boss. Spavone had allegedly refused to engage in a knife fight against Coutolo in prison, whereafter Coutolo believed he had insulted him by not perceiving him as a threat. The crime boss's prison cell showcased his influence. His cell was carpeted, had color television. Coutolo wore suits and a gold watch every day. He also had a personal chef prepare meals such as lobster with wine for him every single day. The NCO's downfall started in the 1980s when Coutolo's underboss was killed. This was followed by his sister's arrest in 1993. His outwardly pious-looking sister had been running operations for him in the outside world since the 1970s. By 2005, Coutolo had lost his place in the criminal world. He even wrote to the Italian president asking for leniency. He stated that he was ill and tired and wanted to spend his remaining years at home. Coutolo's appeal was denied. He died in prison in 2021 at the age of 79. That's all for today's video on the longest incarcerated crime bosses. How many of the crime bosses on our list have you heard of? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching and stay safe.